All right, I will convene our regular meeting of the Burlington Planning Commission for Tuesday, June 14th. Welcome to everybody who's here. Our first item on the agenda is the agenda. It's a pretty full one. We really only have public hearings for it. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
I understand that there was a desire to put it's item 8, the maximum parking and TDM before the transitional shelters public hearing. So unless there's an objection, we'll do that. And are there any other changes?
No other changes from staff.
Okay. Then we'll have our agenda as amended. Second item is the public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the Planning Commission. As I said, we do have 4 public hearings. If you're here to speak on one of the public hearings, we'd prefer if you wait to the public hearing, to that portion of the meeting for your item. But if you won't be able to stay, then certainly you're welcome to speak during the public forum, and we will just take that to be part of the public hearing comments for that item.
I don't really want to stay that long. I just want to make my statement that I want to head pretty much home after this.
Who is speaking?
So Andy, we've got 2 members of the public here. The first speaking is David Call, and yeah, he would prefer to speak early, and then he has to run. So
why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name is David Call. I live on Ward 3, 60 Elmwood Avenue, right across the parking lot from the Pod Shelter, Elmwood Pod Shelter Community Village. And I really want to say is we need to have a shelter and plus a central location for the unhoused people. So when they need to get some information, it'll be all confidential and safe. They're going to have showers and community kitchens and all kinds of great programs. The problem with right now for the unhoused is that they have to go everywhere in every location. If we had a location that would help them get the help they need with clothing and food and jobs and paperwork and social services, addiction. We're going to have Howard people. We're going to have all kinds of addiction specialists. We're going to have job specialists. We are going to have amazing traffic, which will help us. And if we can only have 1 or 2 people, and the pods look very comfortable, and they're going to have a garden, and I live right across from this, and I live with my senior citizen sister, and I am comfortable with this. We're going to have security. They're going to have CDO Brian Pine and his crew are really working hard to make sure that we have everybody in the community to be good stewards. If we could house 1 person after they get the help they need from this shelter program, we're making a difference in our community. And I'm hoping that we vote on this so we can start the project. I have a lot of friends that are unhoused, and they have to travel everywhere just to go get separate help from each other. But if they had 1 location where they had social workers, we can make a difference in our community as good stewards. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say, because if I'm okay with this, you know, I feel comfortable enough to have a shelter pod village across my street. And we could open up other shelters, and other parts of the Vermont could have a program like this too. They could have a pod community in their towns. And it will make a major difference to end homelessness in our country, in the state of Vermont. I'm very compassionate about this because I see too many people suffering and sleeping everywhere. And then it becomes not in our backyard. Every time we want to start a program that's going to help unhoused people, the words become not in our backyard. There's some reason why they can't have that location be in there. And we got to end that statement. We have to say, let's go for this. Let's call it the uncharted positive contract. A blessing for a contract. And I think we could be amazing how we can try this. If we try this and it succeeds, it's going to be absolutely amazing. And that's my statement. And I really appreciate you all listening to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Charles, who do we have next?
I'll wait and talk when my topic comes.
Okay, the next speaker is gonna wait until the agenda.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you, David.
And it looks like Sharon Busher is on the line. Sharon, we will unmute you in just a moment.
And just for clarification, we did get a question in the chat about the time of the public forum starting. This is the general public forum at the beginning of the meeting. The public forums associated with the hearings that are scheduled for tonight will start shortly. But Andy invited comment for people who were not able to stay to hold their comments until later. Sharon, we weren't sure if you were interested in speaking at this point or if you were just noting that you wanted to speak tonight. You should be able to.
I'm unmuted. I only wanted to speak because I zoomed into the Board of Finance meeting last night and they had the same problem with the camera and everyone being washed out. And Zariah and Joe touched the camera. They didn't do anything remarkable, according to Catherine. They just touched it and all of a sudden it came into focus and the colors were true and you weren't washed out. And so that was the only reason why. I don't know what the magic touch was. So Catherine was frustrated and said, well, I could have done that. But so I was just offering that. I am going to speak about the topics at each public hearing, but I wanted to offer that to you. I think you've resolved it somewhat. You're not as clear as it was last night, though, at the Board of Finance, I must admit.
Thanks for the tip. Well, we're doing our best. So thanks, Sharon.
You're welcome. Okay, bye.
Charles, do we have anybody else for the public forum?
Did you want to speak?
Joe, we're doing just general public forum.
Yeah.
Okay. There is this one other.
Yes, Andy, we've got one more, Barry called. We'll unmute you if you'd like to speak. You can speak now, or if you prefer to wait
No,
until the item.
I can speak now. It's okay. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Am I speaking loud enough?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I live next door to where the proposed village is going to be in Mackenzie House. And I have a different concern. First of all, I'm not against homeless people. That seems to be the thing that people jump to, and that's not how I feel. I just feel that this is not the right place because we're all seniors. There are different challenges that we face. There are disabled people here, and I'm one of them. So that's what I'm going to focus on. My disability is something that is actually growing. It's called multiple chemical sensitivities. You'll have to excuse me, I'm actually having a reaction to food right now. So I'm shaking and I can't stop it. This is how severe so I'm going to read you something. It explains what multiple chemical sensitivity is. It's a chronic condition marked by heightened sensitivity to multiple different chemicals and other irritants at or below previous tolerated levels of exposure. Sensitivity to odors is often accompanied by food and drug intolerance, sensitivity to sunlight, and other sensory abnormalities such as hypersensitivity to touch, heat, and or cold, and loud noises. MCS is often accompanied by impaired balance, memory, and concentration. That is to explain that it's not just allergy or some simple thing. It was actually voted, it was put into the congressional record on October 9th, 1998 by Senator Bernie Sanders. And the reason that I am putting this together is because my concern is the smoke, cigarette smoke and pot smoke. This is not going to be one occasional house or person as I'm walking home. You don't allow cigarette smoking in the parks or on Church Street. And this is this is from your website about cigarette smoke. It was before probably pot smoke was legal. So secondhand smoke is a known carcinogen and no level of exposure is risk-free. This is about supporting community, health, and respect for everyone's right to live, work, and play in a healthy and safe environment. So that's what I want, a healthy environment. When I can tell you that these chemical smells, and it can be anything, not just smoke, affects my nervous system and my brain. Thinking and motor function, my thinking and motor brain function are impaired. This lasts the whole time that I am exposed and can be hours afterward. It completely disables me. You can imagine I can't think straight and I'm spastic. It also causes nausea. I can throw up. So there's another quote I'd like to read. If an organization, this is from the Disability Rights Department, the Vermont Department of Disability, Aging, and Independent Living. It's a state agency newly renamed. So it's for elderly people. And this is one thing that's written on here from Vermont Legal Aid. If an organization receives government funding, they must follow the Americans with Disabilities Act. Sensitivities and intolerances are not the same as allergies. Allergies are not considered a disability. Sensitivities and intolerances are. Most expect you not to know your rights. And if this were to go through, this would impact me to such a great degree that I would have to move. And then I would be homeless because there is no place I can afford here except where I live now. The housing for seniors is another problem that should be addressed, because in order to get another place to live, I have to put my name on a list that is at least 5 years long. And there aren't that many places to go to. So, so if you want to cause a problem for me, so many for my health, and also I would have become homeless. So you would be solving one problem and creating another one, because there are other people here that maybe are not. I am certified for this from my doctor, but there are other people that I know of here who do have this condition as well. And then you have, you know, as long as I'm speaking about disabilities, there are people here in wheelchairs, and, you know, that goes into another problem of safety. I have lived in Vermont for 7 years in August, and this is a different thing. And I know a lot of people are bringing up safety.
If you
I
could
didn't-
just, sorry,
Stop.
if you could just keep your comments really to,
Yeah.
if you're talking about the,
Yeah.
the
So
transitional
anyway.
shelter, if you could just keep your comments to that, that would be
Yes.
helpful.
So I just think that for me personally, I mean, I worry about the safety too, but for me personally, the thing I am worried about the most is the cigarette and pot smoke. For me, you would have to make these people, the residents, smoke and only on the street. They would have to leave that area, and you'd have to hope that the wind was blowing it away from us. I can tell you that I have had pot smoke enter my apartment from just one person passing by in the parking lot. And it is impossible to get pot smoke out of my apartment. I have had 3 fans going, and it has taken me 2 hours. I have had to spend, you can see me, right? You can see my face?
No, we don't see images.
Oh, you
sorry.
don't see? Okay, so you know what a respirator mask looks like, right? With the 2 things on the sides of the mask. I have had to keep that on inside my apartment. It's very uncomfortable when people smoke pot or cigarettes outside. And even the distance, there's a bench for the cigarette smokers, and it's the legal place, I guess, decided by HUD. Even when they sit there, it comes into my apartment, and all these things I described to you happen to me. I get.
Are you able to wind up your comments? Just, I know we have a
Yes.
lot of people here
Yeah.
tonight.
Yes, I'm done.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, thank you. So do I just turn you off now? Just,
Yes,
you-
I suppose you can.
okay, okay, you don't need, okay, thank you very much.
Charles, do we have anyone else for this part of the public forum?
Andy, do you want to give just another reminder of what we're doing right now? Because I think some people have joined since you outlined the process.
I'm happy to. So we do have tonight 4 different public hearings that are coming up. And each of the public hearings will have an opportunity for members of the public to speak to us on that particular item. We're in a public forum right now, which is just an open time that people can speak to us. We prefer, if you're speaking on one of the 4 public hearing items, that you speak during that item. If you're not able to stay then, we do welcome you to speak now. One thing though is I do believe we have a lot of people potentially who want to speak tonight. And so if you could just keep your comments, as succinct as possible, so we could make sure we could get through everybody, that would be appreciated.
All right, Andy, we have a few attendees. It's not clear if they'd like to speak now or later. If you would like to speak now, if you can press the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you prefer to wait to speak to a particular item, just hold tight and we'll get to you when we get to your item. Andy, it looks like we're everybody else who would like to speak later.
Okay, great. So we'll close the public forum and we'll move on to item 3, which is the chair's report. At this point, I don't have anything to report, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the director's report. Megan.
All right, I'll be pretty quick. Just wanted to make sure that the commission knew that this month we are busy with a number of public meetings related to some of the housing initiatives that we've talked to you about in past meetings. We'll be starting this off with a virtual public meeting next Thursday, the 23rd at 6. We will be talking about the Trinity Campus zoning amendment that you heard about at your last meeting. The last week of the month on June 29th at 6:30, we're actually going to be having an in-person public meeting at the Generator to talk about the South End Innovation District work. And we will follow that up with a virtual meeting, same content on July 7th at 6 p.m. So we'll make sure that you have these invitations directly, but just wanted to make sure you're aware of them. And this is a big part of what our team is working on this month to get ready for.
Good, thank you. Alex, did you have a question?
I have a question for Megan. I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, Andy or Megan, or we can wait till later, but just I'm interested in the South End Innovation District meetings. Like, we haven't discussed that since like a year ago, I think, to my knowledge. I haven't missed a meeting, so just sort of interested in what those meetings will be about.
Sure. So what those meetings will be about is an opportunity to talk a bit about what some of the questions are related to whether or not a zoning amendment for that part of the city is appropriate. and getting some specific feedback on some of the aspects of what that amendment could include. We have been doing a lot of work kind of internally to follow up on the request that you had heard and the presentation that you heard from us last year. So this will just take some of those considerations that you all heard about and provide an opportunity for us to collect some input on it, so that when we come back to you, we can have some informed and more refined ideas for your discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks. Michael,
I was just gonna say, I really like the hub, the storyboard, ArcGIS, I forget what it's called. But
Yeah.
it was well done and told the story very well. So I'm not, I thought that was great and fairly new.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I encourage the commissioners, we'll send you a direct link if you didn't see it in Front Porch Forum, but definitely encourage you to check it out. And really give a lot of credit to Charles and our other new planner, Sarah, who put that together. So it was their idea and they did a lot of the work to make it happen, so.
good, thanks. Okay, thank you, Megan. We'll close out the director's report and move on to our first public hearing. This is public hearing for proposed ZA-22-03 steep slopes. We'll start off with an introduction of it. Who's going to do that?
I can do this. So Scott is not here tonight, but this amendment is something that was first discussed by your own ordinance committee and ultimately recommended to the full commission. This amendment helps to identify some gaps that were realized in our current ordinances as it relates to development on or near steep slopes in the city. You may remember that we currently have provisions that limit development on very steep slopes and minimize it on moderately steep slopes. So this change adds a new set of provisions to actually map our steep slopes in the city, as well as a 50-foot buffer from the top of the slope, and identify provisions for both materials that are submitted as part of a development application and a condition for projects that are within that buffer or on those slopes to provide a geotechnical study indicating the slope's stability for that development. So that is essentially what this does. There are a number of other kind of details for what needs to be included on a development application with regard to development on these slopes. And there is also a map that identifies areas of steep slope and the 50-foot buffer from them that's included in your agenda packet.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak during the public hearing? We'll open that up now. Charles, do we have anyone for the public hearing for steep slopes?
Yes, Andy, we've got a Susan Butani. If you'd like to speak, you're unmuted.
Great. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? It's Bob Butani, Susan's husband.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, my question is, who provides the geotech study?
Andy, would you like us to answer that question?
If you could.
Yeah, so this puts the responsibility on applicants to get a geotechnical study done by an engineer.
Okay, so in effect, in essence, we are relying on an applicant to provide a geotech study from somebody that the applicant hires? Is that correct?
So at the public forum, I mean, we could answer some questions, but
Okay.
mostly what we want to do is hear your comments. So, I mean, if that's the case, if you have comments about that.
Yeah,
That's
I
right.
mean, my concern based on personal experience, we're dealing with a Frank von Turkovich, who we've been opposing his trying to build a project right on top of a gully head failure. This has been going on for 11 years. Now, it's one of the mapped sites, by the way. Mr. von Turkovich has hired his own geotech person who has come up with the assessment that if Frank is allowed to build on top of this potential landslide area, it will reduce the risk of a landslide. I don't know if we would want our children living in an apartment with a reduced risk of landslide. And my concern is if an applicant provides a geotech study, the applicant's going to find somebody that's going to speak in the applicant's favor. That's my concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bob?
Do we have anybody else to speak during this item?
We've got Sharon's hand is still raised. Sharon, if you'd like to speak, keep your hand raised. If not, if you can go ahead and okay. We're gonna unmute Sharon Busher to speak.
Yes, thank you so much. So this is something that the director knows that before I lost my reelection, this was one of the things that I had as a top priority, was to come forward with some type of legislation that talked about steep slopes and giving some guidance about development that occurs on top of the slope, and protection for those that might be at the base of the slope. Most of the expertise that was provided, I know that Scott isn't there, but Scott spoke with Paul Bierman, who's a geology professor at UVM, and I know the commission is aware of him. I don't know if Charles knows him, but Paul provided a lot of the expertise and also gave input to the draft that you're now holding up for the public to comment on. I wanted something that was stronger. I followed this from the get-go. I went to the ordinance committee meetings, and I am satisfied because it is something now that we can look to say we have criteria, we have some standards about development that occur in any of those areas that the map now identifies. We do have criteria. I do feel that Bob Butani's point about there is a vulnerability there when you have when you have a developer presenting expertise on their development and the city can't provide a look or provide that same expertise to verify that finding. I think that's been a problem all along. That's not unique to Burlington. We've seen that at the state level also, but I don't want to throw this proposed ordinance out because of that. I do feel that this is a good start, but I do feel that what Bob presented, and I feel like there could be some strengthening in the criteria, but to build on this would be something that I look forward to. So I'm hoping that the commission and the city council will understand the value, and potentially the city council ordinance committee can grapple with the vulnerability that was identified by Bob Butani and might have some additional comments or insights. But thank you so much for all the work that was done on it, and I look forward to having this as criteria in the future.
Okay, thank you. Charles, anyone else?
Looks like we do not have anybody else at the moment, Andy.
Okay, great. So I'll close.
Sorry, Andy, we have a question from a member of the public here.
Hi, my name is Luz Hillman. I'm the Executive Director of Facilities at UVM. Do you want to come up? Sorry. I lost the mic. Hi. And I just have a question. I was looking at the map and I'm wondering how this affects existing buildings. It looks like on our Trinity campus, this affects quite a bit of our property. So, you know, going forward, existing buildings, is there going to be any elements related to that?
If you want to close the public hearing, Andy, that's something that we can speak to as a follow-up with the commission as well.
That's fine too, we can follow up later.
Okay. So we'll hold on to that question. You could speak to it when the public hearing is closed. Are there any other speakers for the public hearing?
That is it for now, Andy.
Okay, so we'll close the public hearing, come back to you, Megan, for follow-up comments or follow-up responses to some of those comments. And then we'll come to the commission.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'll take the last question first, which is about how this affects existing buildings. So, and the point was raised about how this new overlay would apply to UVM's Trinity campus. So you may remember that in our discussion of Trinity at the last meeting, I did actually show this map and had made the point that this is another kind of moving piece of zoning work that we're doing that would have an impact on the Trinity campus. Because most of the buildings on the Trinity campus are up on the top of the slope, they're not right on the edge or on the hillside itself. My understanding of looking at the map when it's zoomed in much closer is that most of the existing buildings are just outside of this buffer area that we've established. So that's the first piece, just to make sure it's clear. The second piece then is about how this relates to existing buildings. This really wouldn't have an impact on existing buildings unless those existing buildings were being torn down and redeveloped. So if somebody was submitting an application to build on the same footprint of an existing building, but within this overlay zone, these standards would be applicable. As far as the other, just the questions about who does the geotechnical study, yes, it's correct that this requires an applicant to hire their own engineer that is certified in completing geotechnical studies and submitting the results of those as a condition of their permit before they can begin construction. Many of the standards in this proposed change reference consulting with the city engineer. And as Scott has noted, oftentimes the requirement to perform a geotechnical study is actually triggered by the building code. And there are thresholds that the building officials actually look for in determining whether a geotechnical study is warranted. So this is putting people on notice that they're within an area of the city where that is likely to be required, and establishing what submission materials would need to be part of an application when that's the case. Ultimately, there are many examples of where we require traffic studies and other impact studies as part of the conditional use process, all of which are put on the applicant as a responsibility. And the city does retain the right in most of those cases to hire an outside professional to review and evaluate those studies if there's a reason to question them, or if we feel like we need to confirm their validity. So that's a process that we do have generally in the ordinance today.
Thank you. So let's bring this to the commission. What would the commission like to do? Are there comments, questions, changes, or ready to move this forward to the city council? Emily.
I guess my comment is thinking about the applicant hiring an engineer. Is the engineer required to stamp the drawings? Because I would think that, you know, the check and balance on the fact that if the engineer is paid by the applicant is that if an engineer stamps a drawing, then they're liable.
Right.
If the project fails or the slope fails, they've, you know, stamped a drawing and have their, you know, career and license on the line if it fails. So I guess I'm looking for clarity on if the geotechnical review is a stamped review, or is it, I mean, do we have any qualifications on that?
Yes, it does say that it has to be prepared and stamped by a geotechnical engineer.
Well, to me, that's powerful, because no engineer is going to come, you know, want to touch a project that is sketchy and put their stamp and their career on the line for something that isn't going to work or is at risk.
Thanks. Anyone else? Is there a motion to move this forward to the city council?
I move to move it forward with the associated statutory report
And is with the recommendation?
with a recommendation to pass it.
Great. Motion by Bruce. Is there a second? Seconded by Alex. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Did we lose Eves along the way here?
You,
Looks like we did.
he is here. We're having trouble getting him to show up with his video, but he is here and he should be able to talk if he wants to try it out.
Okay, good. Oh, there you are.
I'm here, Andy.
Thanks. All right, so it looks like, and I don't remember if I asked any nays. Were there any nays on that one? Don't see any, so it looks like that one passed unanimously. Thank you all. So we'll move on to, we'll close out item 5, move on to item 6, which is public hearing for proposed ZA-22-05. This is on Burlington High School zoning.
All right.
Megan, you're gonna kick this one off?
Sure, I'll kick this one off, and I will just note too, for any follow-up discussion, that Joe Weath is here, who is part of the design team for the school. So this amendment is intended to help facilitate the redevelopment of the 52 Institute Road campus, which is the location of the current Burlington High School. This includes a number of changes to the zoning ordinance. The first is to rezone the property associated with the current high school from our recreation and green space conservation district to an institutional zoning district, and then to create an overlay district that provides specific allowable uses and other dimensional standards for new development on that campus. As we've discussed, a big part of the reason why we are considering this is because while the Institute Road campus has been the home of the high school for decades, the current zoning district provides very little flexibility for the future reuse and adaptation of that property to meet the needs of a modern high school. So this establishes standards for specific lot coverage limits, setback limits, building height limits, and allowable uses that are part of or within a school facility on this campus, as well as some standards for how parking is calculated. So there are a number of associated maps that go along with this change to move the property out of the recreation conservation zoning district and into an institutional district, which are included.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments to Megan before we go to the public hearing? All right, let's open up the public hearing. Charles, anyone to speak on this item?
Andy, Joe, would you like to speak?
I'll just be
We do
really
have
quick.
Joey from the applicant team.
Yeah, Joe White, our firm is a project manager working with the district on this project. I'm here tonight representing the district. And I just want to go on record to say that the district supports these changes. We think it's an appropriate location for a high school and tech center. It's been operating there for 50 plus years, and we support making changes that will allow for the continued use and new development of a 21st century high school and tech center. So we support that. The changes.
Great, thank you. Charles, do we have anyone else?
We do not, Andy.
All right, we'll close this item, this public hearing, and on to the commission. Again, any questions, comments, or are folks ready to move this forward or take some other action?
Andy, it looks like Sharon Busher's hand is raised again. Sharon, will
Okay,
Sorry, excuse me. Yes, I did want to speak. I'm sort of floored that no one's there, except there's a special school board meeting talking about the high school tonight. So maybe that's why. I had a couple of questions. Just a couple of comments rather. In the laundry list of what could occur, there was a large recycling center and a large museum that seemed odd, a small, and I guess I wanted the commission maybe to give a critical eyeball to those two. I wasn't clear on that. I didn't follow this. I didn't as closely as some of the other items, so I can't expand on why those two were there on that chart. I support this rezoning completely. I am, and this will be no surprise, I do feel that with a development of this size and scale, that a 20-foot setback from North Avenue seems too close. I know that I did hear some comments from the residents that lived across the street that were speaking about this. I do recall, and I was hoping that people would come and give feedback tonight for you as opposed to later on in the process. So I agree that I think 20 feet seems too close, and I don't know if you made it 40 feet, if that would put a monkey wrench in the whole development and the layout of the school. That's not my intent, but I do feel that giving a little breathing room would be appropriate. Right now, as everyone knows, it's the parking lot, so that the buildings can be massive, but they're set way back from the road. This scenario has parking either under or behind, and the buildings abutting the roadway. I know that's the way developers think these days. I don't think that way. I hate the development in Winooski. I hate that tunnel effect, and I really feel like that little bit of breathing space is quite necessary, especially in Burlington. We're not New York City, and so I'm going to speak to feeling that I'd really like a relook at the setback and question about those two uses on the table. Other than that, this is great. I can't wait for this high school, and hopefully the money will flow that is missing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charles, I assume we still have no one else?
We do not have anybody else.
And Megan, I'm not sure if there was anything you wanted to clarify or respond to based on that.
If the commission would like me to respond to either of those concerns, I'm happy to. If you'd like.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. As far as the recycling center and museum, the group of uses that are in that table, as you'll remember, we're just thinking through what other uses might be acceptable companions to the idea of locating the high school and technical center on this site, as well as things that might sort of be incidental to how those facilities operate. The main difference between a large museum and a small museum, for example, is just the number of square feet. A large museum is 10,000 square feet, whereas small is anything less than that. And I believe recycling center is similar, although I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I don't think it would be a major challenge if the commission were interested in removing the large facilities from that amendment. But ultimately they were just grouped in there as kind of a group of uses, recycling centers, museums that might be compatible with the tech center. As far as the 20-foot setback, this is something that we were discussing quite a bit in terms of what we were trying to achieve in terms of how the new high school related to both Institute Road and North Avenue. Ultimately, this is a slightly deeper front yard setback than what is currently required of the Recreation Conservation District. That's a 15-foot setback. We are talking about taller buildings being allowed within this district than the RCO would have allowed at 35 feet. But it is a slight change from what would be allowed today. For reference, a 20-foot setback is similar to the maximum setback that we allow buildings to be at the North Ave development, the Cameroon Rise development on North Ave in that neighborhood activity center. So we were using that kind of zoning framework a bit in terms of acting as a reference for us to understand both setbacks and height allowances at various points along North Avenue when contemplating how this overlay could be structured. And then you'll also remember that the height allowances are staggered based on where they are with respect to North Avenue. So within 20 feet of the that setback will allow for buildings up to 60 feet. And buildings taller than that might take advantage of the up to 80-foot limit would have to be set back from the street 100 feet. So there are two different setbacks for that.
Thanks for those clarifications. Alex?
Thanks, Andy. Megan, appreciate that going over those details again. And for the record, I am not concerned about recycling centers or museums, large or small, being in that list of the table of uses or potential uses. The question is about the where do you calculate the setback? I was just thinking about the Colchester Avenue setback. That one was not actually calculated from, I don't know, the middle of the street or the edge of the pavement or the sidewalk. Do you have any idea where it's calculated on North Avenue? Where's the mean low water mark?
We do have lots of interesting one-off standards for where you measure things from in campus overlay districts. The reason that issue came up with regard to Trinity Campus and Colchester Avenue is because of where the city's right-of-way versus the property line are located on that property. Which means that, a setback from a front property line was set back even further from the street than in many cases. In this case, it looks like the property boundary on North Ave for the high school is probably at the back of sidewalk like we would typically expect. So we'd be talking about 20 feet setback from the sidewalk into the property.
Thank you. And my understanding is that is required because of the problems of the lot that we want to build the new Burlington High School on, that has hill with at least two different grades and difficult soil to build on. So I think that's why we're doing it that way.
We're trying to balance maximizing the most developable areas of the lot as well as just some of our own urban design objectives, honestly, for infill development. And I think as you've seen some of the renderings from the school in terms of what they're thinking about, I don't think that at this point they're planning to take full advantage of coming all the way to that 20-foot setback line. But it does allow for future expansion if there was ever any need for it.
Great, thank you.
Good. Thanks. Anyone else? Michael?
I'm just going to volunteer to make the motion.
That'd be great.
I'd like to make a motion to move this to council and adopt the report. Did I get that right?
Yes. And have a recommendation from the commission. Good. So we have the motion from Michael. Is there a second? Second from Alex. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand or say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That looks like it's unanimous as well. So thank you on that one. We'll close out, and thanks for all the work that everyone's done on this one. It's been a big project. So we'll close out item 6, and we're actually skipping over item 7 right now, as we said when we adopted our agenda, and move on to item 8, which is the public hearing for proposed ZA-22-07 maximum parking and TDM.
All right, I'll take this one again. So the commission has discussed this amendment in a number of meetings back in the beginning of the year. As you'll remember, this was an amendment that was originally referred to you by the City Council's Ordinance Committee. And after input from the commission, the Ordinance Committee made a number of changes and referred it back to you formally for a public hearing so that they can consider its adoption. This amendment includes 4 main changes from our existing parking ordinance. There are a lot of text changes associated with it, but it does these 4 main things. The first is that it replaces minimum parking requirements with maximum parking limits. For the most part, we've retained our existing maximum limits. We did make some tweaks to specific uses, particularly auto-related uses that the commission discussed. But for the most part, it just is a more clear translation of our existing maximum parking limits. It expands some of the existing exemptions to those maximum parking limits. And this is in part in order to help preserve some other policy goals that we have in our ordinance, such as when a dwelling is occupied by more than 4 unrelated adults. So there are some specific carve-outs for when the maximum limits would not be applicable. The other major thing that it does is expands our TDM, our Transportation Demand Management Program requirements citywide, and it creates 2 different tiers for those standards. So it maintains our existing full requirement to have a transportation demand management plan beyond the multimodal mixed use district and applies it to all developments citywide that include the creation of 10 or more dwelling units and 15,000 square feet or larger of mixed use or non-residential. It creates a new tier for TDM that requires developments of 5 to 9 units to simply unbundle the cost of parking from leases and deeds. And then finally, it includes new standards that strengthen the applicability of and reporting on institutional parking management plans. So it maintains this process despite the fact that the institutional parking management plan will no longer be used as a parking waiver, as a waiver from minimum on-site requirements, and specifies additional data points that must be provided as part of a plan, makes more clear that it is required to be approved, and requires that an approved plan is now a prerequisite of granting permits for institutional projects covered by those plans.
Thank you. Let's now open up the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone who'd like to speak? Charles?
Yes, Andy, we've got Lonnie Ravine.
Okay.
Hi there. So I am here for UVM, and I'm speaking for UVM, and I'm speaking regarding the the institutional parking plan changes. And there may be other people here too. I can't see. I believe there's a couple other people here in addition to Sandy, Sandy from CATMA. So I'm wondering if anybody from our team would like to speak before me, and I can address points after that. Is there anybody else? Can you tell me if there's anybody else who would like to, who has raised their hand?
Andy, we've got Lou Stillman here to speak.
Hi, Lonnie.
Hi, so maybe Luce can speak first, because then I'll add anything that needs to be added after that.
Fine. Our concern is that often UVM receives permits for projects that really don't need any parking adjustments at all. For instance, covered bike racks. We just recently had to get a zoning permit for our tennis court roof replacement because of the air handling units on the roof, building facades. So this will be a challenge for us, we feel, if we have to, wait and look at the parking plan. So that's one of our larger concerns is, and what is the process? Are we going to be applying for amending the JIP at the same time as a zoning permit, or is it a 2-stage process? Will it lengthen our permitting process? So we just would like some clarity. And Lonnie or Sandy, if you want to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, am I on? Am I?
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I do understand that there are there is an idea that the JIP is not strong enough, like doesn't have teeth. And I just wanted to say that right now we had a project that was done when there was no JIP, there was no valid JIP. And we spent, the university spent a lot of time and money and using doing conditions that were worth a lot of money that did address all the issues that the city wanted. So, and that's a direct result of having the requirement for a JIP. So we had financial payments that we had to make. We created a whole parking lot. There were also land use requirements. We created a whole parking lot. We leased a lot with another 200 spaces. So to say that the JIP doesn't have any way of enforcing itself is just not true. And I just wanted to say there's, right now, we're going through unprecedented times. And while we've had a JIP for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and as far as I know, this is the first time that it was held up, but it was held up for fairly legitimate reasons. More information gathering, or some unexpected event like COVID, or even taking a bit longer to get the right consultant. If this kind of situation becomes a high stakes situation where UVM can't build or can't get permits for things that may or may not be connected to parking, then number one, the quality of the JIP might suffer because there's much more of an incentive just to get it done. And it's also going to be financial ramifications that are not really needed if we're talking about a project that doesn't have parking implications, or that has small parking implications, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parking spaces. In that case, we're literally talking about 1 to 1,000, since UVM has more than 5,000 parking spaces. So if we're repaving something and we say, oh, we can stick in a few more parking spaces, is that going to be held up when there's a project, when the JIP is held up for various other completely unrelated but legitimate reasons? In addition, even though the JIP is a once in 5 year thing, we're getting to the place of annual updates, and the annual updates are getting more and more detailed. So you are getting more information earlier and more. Now, the other thing is, if we're in a situation where there's temporarily no joint institutional parking and management plan, in order to get an amendment, or even if there is, but this is a little bit different, up until now, we've had the case where we say, oh, there's a small change, we will update it either in the annual or in the 5 year, in the upcoming 5 year annual. If we have to amend the joint institutional parking and management plan in order to get the zoning permit, that has a potential to be burdensome for both the applicant and the development review board, especially if it has to go through the planning commission also, and duplicative, because basically you're doubly zoning, you're reviewing the same project twice. So, and a couple of other things I just do want to say. There's a limit to how much we can limit cars with having a more robust public transit option. GMT does not get adequate funding to service Burlington and the institutions within the city in a way that will tempt most people to leave their cars at home. This is the other side of an equation that UVM doesn't have, or none of the institutions really has complete control over or budget for, that should be considered when trying to reduce parking impacts. And the last thing I want to say is that telework is a new tool that's only now becoming a large-scale alternative to coming into the office. I don't think anyone can predict exactly how that's going to sugar out. We don't know how it's going to develop, how it's going to change in the next few years. And we're not even talking about if there's another big thing that happens, COVID, monkeypox, I don't know what, where we have to go back to teleworking more. This new phenomenon has the potential to disrupt our usual parking projections. And so a little bit of flexibility might benefit both the city and the institutions. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Charles, do we have anyone else?
This is Sandy.
Sandy and Katie Martin is also unmuted.
Actually, it's just Sandy. Katie, I'm on Katie's account. Sorry for that confusion.
All right, why don't you go ahead?
Great. Sandy Tebow, Executive Director of CAPMA. And I just wanted to provide some comments as well, some overlapping with what Lonnie was just saying, but I want to just go down through the institutional parking plan and just a comment on the user groups. So the patients and visitor user groups that are in the ordinance over the years, the institutions have provided estimates on visitor and patient parking demand, and we're continuing to explore how we can improve that data collection if possible. So just wanted to talk about that user group a little bit. And then one clarity on C in the institutional parking management plan. I just wanted clarity that the parking an analysis of the anticipated parking demand by user group and parking provided to meet that demand is collectively and not per user group, I'm assuming. And then, Lonnie touched a bit on the annual reporting of the JIP through a lot of feedback we received from city staff and planning commission and DRB over the past couple of years. We have been improving the content of the annual update, providing some additional details, such as the parking utilization maps, project updates, on-street parking data, and sustainability and climate impacts. So we'll continue to improve on the annual updates content. And then, I guess the language about no zoning permit or COO without an approved or amended plan is concerning. And I just have some questions and clarification on that, on what is an amendment? What is the content format? Does it go through the DRB process? Is it an amendment to the entire 5-year plan? Because that would be concerning if one institution has an amendment that affects the entire 5-year plan, which means affecting the 3, Hill institutions. So I wanted some clarity on what the amendment requirement is for a document and what the process is. And I think Luz had asked this question earlier about if there are no parking impacts on a project or minimal parking impacts, say 1 to 5 spaces, does this apply to those projects as well and require an amendment? So just a question on that. And I guess the last question I have or comment is we have a 2020-2022 approved JIP that technically expires at the end of December. We are planning to submit our next 5-year in February, March timeline, which means from January through March, there will not be an approved plan in place. So do we request an extension of our current 2-year plan until the next one moves through process? And if there was a project that come up in that time frame, what is their requirement or amendment? So those are comments on the JIP. And then citywide ordinance, as CAPMA's working with more businesses and developers, I just wanted to ask about the annual report requirement, sort of how that's reviewed, what is expected, how it's monitored or enforced by city staff, which I've been meeting with Megan and Scott on, but just wanted to provide that question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else?
And it looks like we do not have anybody else at the moment.
Can I add one thing?
Luz would like to add.
You may wonder, why can't we do a 5-year plan, right? But we have situations where donors may come to us, for instance, our music building where we just put an addition on and we weren't expecting it. And somebody comes forward with a donation, and that's a small project, affects 1 to 5 spaces, and we need a zoning permit. So those things do happen. And we don't always know when they're going to happen. And right now, with the way the bond market is, we're not even sure, going forward in the next 5 years, exactly what we're going to be constructing. So that's why, even though we do our best to estimate, we need the opportunity to adjust.
All right, thank you. Unless there's anybody else who wants to speak to us now, we'll close the public hearing. And I know there were some questions and comments. Megan, I don't know if there are any that you want to respond to or anything you want to highlight.
Yeah, there were a lot of comments and questions that were made, so I did my best to try to record them, and I'll go kind of in the order in which they were shared. So the first was the issue of, if this ordinance would apply to projects that really don't have any impact on parking. We also got an email from Lisa Kingsbury, who works in campus planning today, with a similar concern about this. I do think that it is reasonable for us to consider adding to the section of the ordinance that talks about the standards for approving and applying a JIP to make some carve out for things that truly do not have any net change or net impact on parking or transportation that the institutions might complete. So examples like you heard about repairing a roof, doing facade improvements, maybe installing a statue or a bike rack. These things do require permits and certificates of occupancy for completion from a building permit perspective. And I do think it's reasonable for us to make it clear that if they are essentially non-habitable space, that they would be exempt from the requirement to be incorporated in the plan. I don't know if there are any, I'll stop there just because there were a lot. So this time I want to give the commission an opportunity to weigh in.
Megan, on that particular one, I have more of a process question than a substantive one on that. This particular item, this zoning change, proposed zoning change, came to us through a different process. It came to us through the city council. We had weighed in on it, provided comments. Some of our comments were adopted. Half of them in essence weren't. The comments all dealing with the TDM that we had recommended be done separately from this. And then it came back to us from the city council and really just asking us to hold a public hearing and close out, our role in this. If the commission does want to make changes, or if we think there are changes that should be made from this, what would be the avenues for us to do that, given the route that it came to us on? Would it be for us to actually make changes in the proposed zoning ordinance? Would it be to recommend to the city council that when it goes back to them, if it goes back to them, assuming it does, that they make the changes? Do we need to, for our recommendation, could we just say, we recommended it like we do with the others? Could we say that we are just sending it back to them and we have fulfilled the obligations of the public hearing? So I guess it's more of a process question. And I think you teed it up, this question, by saying that there were some changes that might be appropriate to make in this.
Yeah, thank you for that clarifying question, Andy. This, I should have opened with this note about the process, how this
No problem.
is coming through the commission at this point. Yeah, it is kind of confusing because this has been referred to you by the city council, essentially with the request that you correct technical deficiencies. But the commission is also afforded an opportunity to provide comment as part of that public hearing and referral process. So I do think that some of the things that you've heard tonight are clarifications that may be worth considering being made to the ordinance. And the way that I would suggest including them, if the commission agrees, would maybe be in a memo to encourage the council to complete these changes before they adopt the ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, with that, any other questions or comments on that particular item? And I think Megan still has a few other ones. Michael?
Well, I think I wanted to clarify the commission's perspective, at least as I understood it when we were developing this, is that the institutional parking management plan is an essential existing document, and that document more or less had already divorced the campuses from the minimum parking requirement. And as we look to create a maximum parking requirement, we wanted to deal with the conditions on the ground rather than something that may not be applicable citywide. So I thought it's kind of important to express that we are not trying to sort of create something new. And my observation was that a lot of the clarification questions were those that were related to the plan itself that are probably pre-existing this particular effort.
Okay, thank you. I just want to note one of the questions that just came up on the comments was, I think it was from Kelly Devine asking if others could comment on this. There may have been others. We might have closed the public hearing portion of this too soon. There might have been some others who wanted to speak. And so if that's the case, we'll certainly give others a chance to speak.
Yeah, so the clarification was in writing. So yes, this will go to the city council again. They will have at least one more meeting and a public hearing. So highly encourage that if you have anything on any aspects of this ordinance that you would like for the council to consider as they take it back up, that you can submit those to them in writing.
Great.
I do see Eve's hand, Andy.
I think, Michael, were you finished or did you have more to say?
It's a separate thought, so I think it's appropriate to turn the floor over to Yves.
Okay, Yves?
Well, I was just going to follow up on what Michael said. You know, I've made no secret of the fact that I think that this is a plan that has not been vetted properly by the Planning Commission. It was sort of given to us and we were asked to rubber stamp it. And now we're being asked to do the same thing again. It has the potential to have a massive impact, not only on the city, but on our partners. And I think it's extraordinarily short-sighted to just rush this through and ask us just to hold a public hearing and give it back to the council. I think the council should allow us to examine this. This should be given the intention that it deserves. We should have shareholders and stakeholders weigh in on their perspectives. And if we do something like this, we should have adequate rationale and data to back up what it is that we would like to do, which I do not see.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else?
Would you like me to go through some of the other questions, Andy, or? Oh, we just lost your audio.
That is odd.
For your back.
My back?
Yeah.
Okay, that was strange. Yeah, Megan, please, if you could go through.
Okay. Yeah, so I do think it would be reasonable to make a recommendation to the council that they consider kind of exempting non-parking impact developments from this limit or from being required to be part of the GIF. There was a concern about, I think maybe speaking a bit to Michael's point, there was a concern that was raised that the existing GIF did provide a process for resolving parking impacts for projects that weren't already part of the plan. And that is true. However, because the minimum on-site parking requirements are being lifted, there is no kind of catch that would require the institutions to manage their parking without those minimum requirements in place. So the process that brought UVM to the table when they did bring forward a project that was outside of the plan will no longer exist. And that was one of the concerns that was discussed both at the Planning Commission level as well as at the City Council level when we were talking about the impact of these changes collectively. So as Michael had pointed out, wanting to make sure that we were just creating a process that holistically looked at demand generators and the ways that we are accommodating them. There are a couple of questions about how an update happens. The amendments, or I'm sorry, the ordinance does specifically state that if the institutions bring a project forward that is not part of the plan, that an amendment needs to be offered. I do, and we have heard this question from a couple of other people as well, agree that we could provide some clarifying language about what constitutes an amendment. The intention was not for this to require that the entire 5-year plan be updated and resubmitted, but rather a form of an addendum is offered that speaks specifically to some of the criteria that are in that section. How does this fit within the overall plan? How does it modify the assumptions and the solutions being put forward? So I think regardless of whether the Planning Commission wants to say anything about that in referring this forward to the council, we can talk about the opportunity to provide some clarifying language for them. Go ahead. I think somebody was going to ask a question.
Was there any question?
Oh, sorry. I thought I heard somebody. Then I think the last piece here is about, there was a question from Sandy, or there were a couple of comments from Sandy about some of the user groups that are specifically called out and different strategies that need to be part of a plan. The intention there was really to preserve cross references to other parts of the ordinance that were being stricken as a result of this amendment in terms of strategies. And it was acknowledged that a lot of the data that is specifically referenced in the ordinance is data that UVM, Champlain, the Medical Center, CATMA have been working to provide and expand in the JIP. But there was an interest, at least on the part of the City Council, to make sure that that was memorialized and ensure that regardless of who's completing that report, that that data is offered at a minimum. And then finally, as far as annual reporting requirements, there is an existing standard in the ordinance that those be submitted annually to the zoning administrative officer. So essentially Scott Guston's team. How this is being monitored and enforced, unfortunately, I would need Scott to speak to. I think that we are only nearing the first annual reporting for a lot of the initial projects that have gone through this TDM requirement process. So I'm not 100% familiar with how that's taking place.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think that's one where the commission was a little bit uncomfortable with what came back from council, given the staff burden and I think some desires to create comprehensive TDM rather than individual TDM. So I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel about it, but one comment, I guess we may actually see this again at another meeting, but one comment I'd like to have back is to again consider separating the TDM aspects from the maximum, the change to maximum limits. If I can, Andy, can I have one new question? Megan, as I looked at this, and I don't know if there's precedent in what was done downtown, but something I guess I just hadn't focused on previously, but I think is a little bit important given our housing situation and related to affordability, is in the decoupling aspect of parking from rent. It just strikes me as a great opportunity to raise rents through a backdoor means. And so what, if any, sort of administrative or oversight monitoring of that decoupling exists, or maybe it doesn't, and that's fine too, but that's my concern with that decoupling at the sort of level of project that we're talking about.
Yeah, this is something that was discussed pretty extensively when we first adopted these TDM requirements. And ultimately, I think that the discussion or the resolution is that it is not necessarily monitored in a specific way. The report needs to include information about how these are being completed. And so I could talk to Scott about what they're seeing in terms of how, TDM managers are discussing and providing information about what the rents are and what the market rate for renting parking is. But ultimately, I don't think that that is something specifically because we don't have rent limits anywhere in our ordinance other than for capital A affordable housing that we have much of a kind of mechanism to control.
Yeah, and that's just my concern as I reread this. It's just, it's like a perfect opportunity to create a new fee for, you know, because everything's changing so quickly, you can't sort of like disaggregate these various components of rent in a very methodical way because of inflation and supply and demand. And I suppose that's my concern at that level. You know, it's one thing when you're talking about a 40-unit project and, you know, it's new construction, you can sort of segregate out costs and things like that. But if you have a, you know, less than 10 units, that may or may not, you know, those parking spaces are probably just going to sit there regardless because it's probably not a very big footprint. And then all of a sudden you've sort of created this mandate to have a separate fee structure. I just worry it raises rents, sort of an unintended consequence.
Emily?
I think that the rents are going to be as high as the market will bear, period.
That's agree,
So
agree.
if you
But
picture
then
it
you
with
have a
parking,
new, you've,
Sure.
Oh, hold on, Michael. Let's
fair
just let Emily finish and then
I think that the
you
rents
could speak.
are as high as the market will bear. And if the market will bear $1,600 and $100 for parking, it's going to be $1,600 and $100 for parking. And if you don't charge for parking, it's going to be $1,700. I don't think that adding the parking is going to increase rents. I think that the rents are always going to be the highest they can possibly be. If we had rent control, then I would agree with you because there might be a cap on rent and then you'd find the sidecar that you could charge for parking in order to, you know, raise rents in a different manner, but we don't have rent control. Maybe Bruce could weigh in because he actually charges rent.
Bruce, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute.
Trying to find the mute button. I think I agree with Emily. I think I try to limit the amount of parking because, quite frankly, parking's sort of a headache because it has to be maintained and it's hard to maintain a lot because cars are not always vacant from the lot. I think the landlord has a cost and it has to pencil out or they won't build it. So yeah, I think absent a rent control situation, I think unbundling parking makes us build less of it.
Anyone else? On any item, any questions about this whole zoning proposed amendment? And the question, Michael?
I'm just going to finish up. I'm not concerned about the unbundling on new construction. I'm concerned about it on existing units below that will now be affected this. So below 10 units existing, that's my perspective on it. And it's a very difficult topic to sort of suss out in the data, but that's my concern.
Okay. So what would the commission like to do with this item? I think we have a few different choices. One is we could go I'll call it our more traditional route of recommending this, you know, forwarding this back to City Council with a recommendation for adoption. We could, you know, that's what we normally often do, but we have a range of other options available to us. We could make changes to it and then send it back with changes. I don't know that other than the technical changes, that's really in our purview right now because of the way it came to us. We could send it back to them with recommendations to make changes, but overall without a recommendation or with some other type of recommendation. I suppose we could decline to send it back to them. I don't know if that's really in our purview. I think they asked us to get it back to them. So what would folks like to do? Alex, you're raising your hand.
What if we just made whatever changes we felt appropriate and sent it back to them? Because, you know, whether it's in, you know, maybe slightly out of our purview or not, because this is what we think is the right thing to do. And, you know, we're the planning commission.
Sure. I'll speak for myself. I'm happy to do that, but I'm probably not of a mind to recommend this because it includes the TDM portion of it. We already, as a commission and personally, don't think that that's something that was appropriate for this. We sent them a memo before telling them that. They sent us back to us with it. So just because they gave it back to us with it, I mean, that's again within their purview, but I'm not comfortable then saying, yes, now go ahead and adopt it. I think for myself, I'd still like to say, I don't think that's an appropriate thing to couple the maximum parking with the TDM in the way that they're doing it. Michael, I think you spoke to that a few minutes ago, and I agree with the way that you articulated that one. So personally, I would not be recommending that this be adopted in the form or even with, some tweaks to it, because I think it's not done right to begin with. I don't know how others feel. That's just the way I am on this.
Andy, could I just provide a clarification about the statutory process that this was referred to you under?
Sure, that would be helpful.
So Kim Sturdivant's not here, who I would normally look to answer this question, but I did pull up the section of statute that talks about referral of bylaw amendments to you by the city council. And it specifically says that the commission shall promptly submit the amendment with only technical corrections to deficiencies to the legislative body, together with any recommendation or opinion it considers appropriate. So I do believe at this point, even if you do not recommend its adoption, if you do have an obligation to refer it back to the city council.
Good, that's helpful. But it could be with our comments.
It could be with comments, yes.
So, Michael?
Should we wait to see the memo that Megan was describing with the amendments to sort of things that don't move the needle for on-campus development?
Yes. So one option would be to have Megan or Charles or whoever put together a memo that essentially reflects what our discussion is, even though we didn't have a full discussion yet. And but we could work off of that at our next meeting. Megan, we don't have to refer today, do we?
No, I don't believe so. I would encourage that we try to close this out at your next meeting though, and refer it at that point.
Okay, so we could ask Megan to put together a memo that would go with our referral back that, reflects our discussion as best as she can, and then we could refine it at our next meeting. Is that something the commission would like to do?
Did we put the comments in that memo or just the technical amendments?
I think all of it would go in, comments and technical changes.
And our opinion that they're doing it wrong.
If that's what everyone else still agrees with. Yes. Okay. So Megan, it looks like we have some homework for you.
Okay, we'll get on that.
Okay.
All right.
Good. Anything else before we close this item out for tonight? All right, then we'll close this one out. Thank you, and we'll move on to item 7, which is public hearing for proposed ZA-22-06 transitional shelter. Megan, if you want to start this one off again, but just before we get started, I just want to note that it's 8 o'clock right now. And do you know how many, Charles, do you know how many people want to speak to this one? I don't have a sense at all how many are here.
We have 2 in-person commenters and online. It looks like we've got probably at least 4. If you'd like to speak on this next item, can you please raise your hand in Zoom by pressing the raise hand icon. We've got 6 online speakers and 7 online speakers and 2 in-person speakers, so 9 total.
Okay, what I would suggest on this item is that because everybody is here, that we hear from the people who want to speak during the public hearing. And we'll get an introduction from Megan, hear from the folks who want to speak at public hearing. But given the hour, that we defer our action until the next meeting. I just don't think we're going to be able to get through it if we want to really give people an opportunity to speak tonight. Does that make sense to folks before we get started? Okay. All right. Megan, if you want to open this up again, that'd be great.
Right, so this is a proposed amendment that adds an additional tier for emergency shelters within the city. It maintains all of our existing standards for permanent emergency shelters that are operating within the city and creates a new tier for what we've referred to as interim emergency facilities, which are intended to be quickly deployed and time limited. In developing these standards, there are specific allowances for locations in the city where interim facilities may be located and under what circumstances, such as on city-owned property or property that is operating under an agreement with the city, as well as limit to both the initial permit application as well as annual renewals. There are some basic site standards for the type of site that can accommodate an interim facility. And then there are also requirements that an interim facility is subject to a pre-application neighborhood meeting and that an operations plan is provided as part of an application. As part of meeting those basic standards for an interim emergency shelter, the proposal also would allow for administrative approval by the zoning administrative officer rather than a conditional use permit review by the development review board. And that's all.
Okay, great. So why don't we open up our public hearing now? We could start with the folks who are in the room with you, and then we'll go to the ones who are calling in like we are.
Okay, Andy, it's just going to be reduced to one speaker, and first we'll start with Trudy Richmond.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Trudy Richmond, and I live in Mackenzie House. I'm one of about 30, 35 elderly folks who live right next door to the current proposed Pod Village. I really want to discourage you from lumping together the needs for a chronic homeless shelters in with needs for acute shelters for things like emergencies like hurricanes and things like that. I think those are two complete different issues. Pod City was pretty much sprung on us. There wasn't any, there was supposed to be notification, there wasn't any. I've been sort of following this from the beginning. I really don't think you want to cut out the DRB and the public from making decisions about this. Brian wants to go behind closed doors with a couple of zoning board members and just get it done. That's what he would like to have done with Pod City, but we kind of caught wind of it and it didn't happen. I think he's getting a lot of flack that he did not expect. I think he's getting really tired of the DRB questions and putting him off. He's getting tired of these public meetings. And I know that within this new proposal, he's suggested he will have one public meeting. Well, if they're anything like the public meetings we've been having, which is go ahead and tell us how you feel. And basically we feel your pain, but they're going in anyhow. It's been a nightmare. And I think you really need to kind of understand, and you may already do this, but when he says low barrier, I mean, do you really understand the people that he's targeting? And I don't want to say people, I want to say the behaviors, because I'm not against homeless shelters. I'm not against anybody wanting to change their life and do better. But who he is targeting are the people that have behaviors that will not allow them to be housed anywhere else. They are active alcoholics, active drug addicts. There's going to be absolutely no vetting. They don't even have to have an ID. You don't even know their name. They can have arrest warrants out for them. You don't know. The other thing they don't have to have is any desire to change their behavior. They're not going to rehab. They're not going to get help for their mental illness. They're going for 3 hots and a cot and to be able to continue their behavior. I mean, I'm not hearing anything. There's supposedly 700 people that are going to be homeless come July. You can't tell me there aren't 30 people there that want help. that would love to quit using drugs and alcohol, that would love to get help for their mental illness. The fact that you're just going to open your door to anybody and say, continue your behavior. And then you must understand that if you allow him to go behind doors and allow the zoning board members to just sign off, he can put these anywhere in the city he chooses. One man, one person can decide this. I don't think anybody should have that kind of power. This is a democracy. It's not one person. I mean, this is not Brian Hines' fiefdom of pods. This is crazy. It's absolutely insane.
Thank you for your comments.
You are absolutely welcome, and thank you for listening. I feel very passionately, as do the other 35 people that live there. Do not let him do this. Let the people speak. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles, and who do we have now calling in?
So I'm going to just start at the top of my list, Andy. First, we've got Sharon Busher.
Great. And Charles, I'm just going to let you move us along through them. So in between, until it seems like you're stalling out, I'll just let you take care.
Great. Sharon, if you can unmute yourself. Sharon, are you able to unmute yourself?
Is that okay? Can you
Now
hear
we
me?
can hear you. Yes, now we
Okay.
can.
Sorry, I was looking at the text and you're down in a little, and I'm on my phone too. So it's anyways, I just wanted to get the right piece of information. So I continue. You've made a lot of progress on this, and trying to differentiate temporary versus, permanent. I liked the conversation where you were considering temporary really being just for 1 year and then having to renew up to a total of 3 years, and then it would become permanent. That seemed to be more in sync with what this type of policy is about. I don't know if that's where you're going to land, but I liked that. I had some questions about, and I was trying to find it. Somewhere in this, it says the word agency. The agency must approve the operational plan. And I wasn't quite sure who was the agency. And so I'm sorry, I still am not where I found that language, but I know you all can find it. And I wanted clarity about that, because when I read through here, it didn't seem clear to me. And if the city needs an agreement with a private person who might indeed create such a village, would the city then approve their operational plan? So is the agency ultimately, if it's a private venture, but the city needs to have some oversight, does the city ultimately need to approve the operational plan? I didn't find that incredibly clear in the draft before you tonight. And then I also had another question. If you have a temporary village and it's now 3 years and it becomes permanent, as you state in your table, now that has to meet all of the design standards or the criteria that were not imposed on it before. Would that mean that they would have to kind of start from scratch and kind of redo that whole area? Once again, it seemed to me like the proposal allowed for maybe, would the density be appropriate? Could that design that was approved as temporary move to a permanent status without a lot of work, or would this require a lot of rework? And is that the intent, or do you want it to be a smoother transition if indeed it becomes permanent? That was another question that I had as far as this. It's so complicated, but I think in essence, even though I'm saying I couldn't find the answers, I feel like it is very clear. The comparison between the emergency, temporary, shelter, and permanent is good. I like the format, and I thank you for it, and I'm especially supportive of the fact that there needs to be pre-neighborhood or meetings with the neighborhood wherever these little villages are created. It's so important to get information out accurately, dispel rumors, and find out what the real issues are, because I think none of us know all of the neighborhoods and all of the challenges until we hear from the people that currently live there. So thank you again.
All right, Andy, the next speaker will be Alex Twombly.
Hello? Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I just basically wanted to comment on how I'm concerned that this resolution is kind of being used to circumvent public process on an already existing project that really doesn't have the support of the surrounding community. There are a few issues with that because, well, for one, Cito, the company that's putting in the existing project that's planned, already tried to skirt public process as much as possible through like the current zoning progress with things such as the community meeting that they already had with us. For example, it was not, the residents of the surrounding neighborhood were not notified until 6 o'clock or like 12 o'clock in the afternoon that day, and the meeting was at 6 o'clock. And this history of like trying to skirt public process has me really worried for like why these shelters don't need to essentially go through the normal zoning review, especially because the impact is a lot greater than just the 30 residents, at least for the planned project. I'm not sure about the future projects. Along with the 30 residents, there's a daytime portion of it that's expected to attract up to like 150 to 200 people a day. And I think that does have significant impact on the neighborhood and probably should go through the correct due process.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Alex. Next speaker will be Cooper.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so my concern is also the implication
Your name?
that
Or your full name?
Cooper Siegel, Cooper is
great,
my
thank
first
you.
name. Yeah. My concern is also the implication that this change would have on the current proposal at the 50 Elmwood site. I'm also a neighbor of this project. And I've been to just about every meeting that has been in the books for this project, as many as I could go to. And we have repeatedly been told that this zoning change would not affect the Elmwood lot. My concern now is that that message is changing. And I guess my main question is, how will this zoning change, if it goes into effect, affect the current public process that is happening? Because I think that we've already had this, we are waiting for the Development Review Board to make their vote. We are in this extended process. I think it would be a real disservice to the community that has been, you know, engaging in this public process to all of a sudden do away with this. And I do share similar concerns as other people have expressed. If this change is not going to affect for this project, which, you know, as I said, we've repeatedly been told that it wouldn't. So I would be incredibly, incredibly disappointed to have been lied to. I think that's pretty, you know, as anyone would. But I do have concern for in the future. You know, these kinds of projects, they do have huge impacts on communities. And I think that to expect that, you know, that in this kind of situation, there's not going to be a problem with all of a sudden just kind of pushing this kind of large project onto a community. I think that's really wishful thinking. And I think people end up with, you know, very negative feelings towards this kind of project when it's been pushed on them like this. And I think that's happened here. And I think it's a real disservice to projects that, you know, there are real important projects that need to be done to help combat homelessness in Burlington and everywhere in Vermont right now. And I think this kind of motion would actually do a disservice to that. So I think that's my huge concern. And I do hope that there'll be some, you know, that among the Planning Commission that will really think about how this might impact the public process that is happening, not in the future, but like right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, would you have an objection to me just quickly clarifying that point? Because we've heard this from a couple of speakers, and I do think it would be important to answer the question about how this amendment relates to the current application for Elmwood Avenue.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, so just in case there's any other speakers here who wanted to share similar concerns with you. So the city has already submitted an application to the zoning office and ultimately to the development review board for the specific project that many people have referenced on Elmwood Avenue. That process is already underway. The development review board is already deliberating on that. And this zoning amendment does not change anything about the process that that application is going through currently. This zoning amendment would apply to any future applications for future projects that might appear before the city.
Thank you.
Right, Andy, our next speaker will be Jeff Nick, and following Jeff, we'll have Kelly Devine, Evan Langfeld, and Christopher Aaron. But first, let's start with Jeff Nick.
Thank you. You all can hear me?
Hey, Jeff, go ahead.
As you know, I'm chair of the Church Street Marketplace, and we've weighed in before. We have great concerns about this project, particularly the Elmwood Ave site, but I guess it applies to other locations as they come forward. This housing concept is untested in our community and really poses a huge risk. What we do know is where it's been tried before, it's set away from existing neighborhoods and prime commercial districts. In this case, we're prepared to place the service-resistant population 700 feet from the marketplace and less than 50 feet from existing affordable housing. Not very fair to certainly the surrounding residents. What's quite telling is thus far in a community with robust social service network, no one has stepped up to manage this type of housing. That fact should be speaking volumes about the challenges of managing this type of housing. The city seems prepared, and I mentioned this before, to ignore its own municipal plan, which advises against placing more social services downtown because our community is overburdened and the concentrations of social services become unmanageable. It's right in the plan, and I'm not sure how the city can ignore its own plan. So, you know, you really have to give this a lot of thought. Looking at the DRB, and I'm straying a little bit here because I'm looking at the DRB, and this applies to really to what you're thinking might include. It talks about shall not result in undue adverse effect on each of the following general standards. And it talks about the character of an area. It talks about specifically stated policies and standards of municipal plan. So right there, it's telling the DRB to consult their municipal plan, and they're kind of ignoring that fact. And up until now, no one has given the Marketplace Commission any assurances that the city has a plan to curb antisocial and criminal behaviors emanating from this compound. We have not seen any rules that the residents must follow, such as will there be a curfew? Will residents be allowed to come and go according to like the weather? Could they just not show up but still occupy the pod? Could they end up in City Hall Park like they do now? They're camping in City Hall Park. Doesn't seem to be a problem. You know, if you invite more people to this pod, there's got to be some rules and regulations. And we're hoping that, you know, the residents, any agreement that they sign to move in will require them to follow city ordinances and the Church Street Marketplace rules and regulations. Otherwise, with the close proximity to the marketplace, we could have complete chaos out here. Very concerning, especially reduced police presence downtown. What about drug sales, firearm possession? Will the staff be need to be awake 24 hours to watch over everything? There are just a huge number of unintended consequences. So we're very concerned. And I will say that it was interesting to note earlier in your conversations, you talked about steep slopes and other things and the applicant bringing in its own experts. So in this case, I really think if we're going to do this, we've got to bring in some experts. We've got to hear from communities that have done this before and find out what works and what doesn't work, because there's a huge consequences that could be looming out here, and that we better be prepared. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next speaker will be Kelly Devine.
Thank you. Kelly Devine. I'm the Executive Director of the Burlington Business Association. Let me just start out by saying that over the past month or two that we've been looking at this, I have talked to probably 50 to 75 different business owners about this proposal. And I have been able to keep it very separate from Elmwood Avenue proposal, but I do know that for most of our citizens, it is a bit confusing, I will say, since they seem similar and they're running in parallel. I would say that to the one, every business owner that I've talked to has said pretty clearly that they don't have a problem with the idea of a pod shelter. They want to be able to do something to help the homeless. Another thing they say to me pretty consistently is we have a housing crisis, a whole bunch of different sectors of the housing market, and kind of why is the focus on this one and why is this one being expedited? So now that would be a question I'd put forth to the Planning Commission. And do we plan to expedite other types of housing to correct the housing market? Because when I look at the administrative stuff that are subject to administrative approval, something of this complexity, something that elicits this much interest from the community, this many concerns, it doesn't seem to be consistent with what is already on your list of administrative approvals. I would say that you know, for our downtown, heart of downtown business community, the best case scenario is that this is successful and it works out really well. The worst case scenario is that it's not successful and it doesn't work out well. There's spillover behaviors. People, you know, don't actually get housed, or not enough of them do. So, you know, I've really been working with the mayor as much as I can to try to give feedback to help make sure that it's a success. And I do think that if the city wants it to be a success, if the Planning Commission wants it to be a success, I would seriously consider more than one neighborhood meeting to gather feedback before approving something like this. That's one thing that I have a pretty significant concern about. And since it's an untested type of use in our community, it seems to me that we would learn a lot by going through the DRB with this a couple of times, get one built, get it tested, then consider an expedited approach. That's my thoughts on that. I have some specific questions that I've actually put in writing, but I don't think I've gotten an answer to. Section 13.1.2 lists other supportive services. I have some concerns when we talk about, you know, putting these things in different locations in the city with administrative approval, whether that would also imply that you could jointly approve something with the level of complexity of the community resource center, because that is a very different type of a use than a pod. While I understand that it's supportive, that's something that may be much further out of the character of a neighborhood than just the shelter pods. I haven't seen a lot of communities where, while they all provide services, the ones that I've looked at nationally, almost all of them have limited services for the residents, not a community service center co-located on the site. And I don't see how that's specified whether or not that would be allowed under this permit. I'm also concerned about, the lack of a management company. And I know that a lot of the concerns I think that's come from residents relates to the fact there isn't a management company to answer questions. So you say in a section, you say in your section under management that there will be on-site management by qualified adults, but I would strongly suggest that the language be strengthened to say that you have a management contract in place before giving administrative approval to something that is this complex. I think on behalf of the business community, we're certainly willing to work with the city to try to make this a success. And I think that considering more of a learning curve or a kind of trial experimentation and then learning curve on this kind of use would make more sense for the city of Burlington. I think it would make the residents and the downtown businesses feel better. And I think it would better position us to ensure that this can be a successful project and can really help folks throughout the city. Because I think we all agree with the homeless count being at 700, we need more than 35 of these or 30 of them. And if the first one's successful, it's going to be more likely that, that others will be able to be cited without a lot of pushback. I just read before coming on the meeting about the judge putting a halt order on Champlain Parkway, and that did not make me smile at all. So much energy and time is put into that. And I think it's just an indication that if we don't get a decent amount of community buy-in, that these things can't be successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker, Andy, will be Evan Langfeld, and then we'll finish up with Christopher Aaron. First, we'll have Evan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. My name is Evan Langfeld, and I represent O'Brien Brothers, owner of Mackenzie House, a 41-unit low-income senior, disabled, and family housing property located at 43 Elmwood Avenue. The property, which our company developed and has owned and operated for 38 years, consistently scores in the highest tiers of HUD-affiliated Section 8 properties throughout the country for the quality of its property and its grounds, its management, maintenance, cleanliness, and amenities. In fact, we received our most recent score from HUD in the last month, which was a 99A, representing the highest possible score outside of a perfect 100. We take great pride in providing our tenants with an attractive, comfortable, and safe living environment. I want to be clear that we as O'Brien Brothers, and I think I speak for our Mackenzie House residents as well when I say we recognize the need for solutions to the city's homeless situation. We are empathetic to those living in these situations, and we are also sympathetic to the city's efforts to try to find solutions to the situation. It is not an easy task, which is why we also believe that the public process is important to find a solution that works for all and doesn't just attempt to solve one problem by creating another or trying to solve one challenge by doing so on the backs of another underserved population. That provides you with a little background on who we are and where we are coming from. Specifically, we have several concerns relative to this type of use, which is currently being contemplated immediately adjacent to our property, and more specifically as it relates to a low barrier or wet shelter next to a highly vulnerable population. However, as it relates specifically to what your purview is as the Planning Commission, our biggest concern is the request to move this to a process that essentially excludes public process, input, and review, and potential standards and conditions being implemented by the Development Review Board. It really boils down to this. Administrative review and approval authority are for instances where the use is relatively benign and straightforward, and therefore not justifying a public input and Development Review Board process. That could be in addition to a porch or a minor deviation from a parking standard or signage requirement. My question to the Planning Commission members is whether this type of use falls within that level of minor review, or if it is something of greater magnitude and therefore justifying a greater level of public input, as well as potential requirements for appropriateness, safety, management standards, and other considerations, which would be the job of the Development Review Board to levy. I'd respectfully ask that the Planning Commission not remove the public process from a decision of this magnitude. This is an important decision for the city, and it requires a commensurate level of public input, review, and discourse. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Christopher Aaron.
You're muted, Christopher.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Terrific. My name is Christopher Aaron Felker. I'm a Ward 3 resident, 9-year resident of Burlington and chairman of the Burlington Republican Party. I'd like to start off by thanking the members of Mackenzie House, the Church Street Marketplace, the Burlington Business Association, and members of my neighborhood who come forward to speak this evening in opposition to this process, to this change in the Planning Commission. I think that public process is really important to this, any kind of discussion that we have on moving out and rolling out any of these shelter pods. And I've been extremely discouraged through the process that's been presented from, and I won't point fingers at the administration, but I will say that the direction of the communications coming from CEDO have been disappointing at best, and extremely unsettling also. To start off, the city has professed multiple times that we wouldn't go forward with this project unless we had a management agency to run this facility. But we still seem to be progressing without any management agency to run this facility, without any prospects of a management agency to step forward to run this facility. And it's not because, well, it may be in part due to the fact of how difficult this task may be, but also there is a staffing shortage, and our well-established, reputable organizations in the area just don't have the people to do this. So if we don't have the people to staff the already, our agencies already, and we don't have the staffing to staff this Elmwood Avenue facility, I don't think that it's smart or prudent of us to give the administration a green light to start rolling these out anywhere else. Furthermore, it's important to note that since we don't currently have a management agency contracted, we don't have an ability to evaluate their own past performance as to whether or not they have been efficient or successful at this. I think that Kelly Devine brought up a very good point. A few test cases where the administration and the city proves to Burlingtonians that they are able to do something like this, then it would be prudent to potentially green light a fast track or easy pass lane for them to get through this and roll these out sooner. They have not demonstrated that. Quite the contrary. We've actually been met with quite derogatory language, and it's just been a very distasteful process. The CEDO has stated that there are rules in place for residents of this pod village on Elmwood Avenue. I understand that the Planning Commission's vote tonight and what you're considering is greater than that, but they don't have, for all their planning, they don't really have a system or an infrastructure in place to enforce these rules. Again, very discouraging and not something that I would be inclined to give them more of a green light to try and roll this out more in the future. One basic example is that if a member or a resident of this Elmwood Avenue pod facility violates the rules, they are then banned from an 8-block radius. But they're, after repeated questions to Director Pine as to how you are going to enforce safety and security in the immediate 3-block radius, let alone how are you going to enforce this banning of an 8-block radius downtown, they have no answer. They have no answer. They've created no neighborhood impact study. They've never even reached out and communicated with the immediate neighbors in the 3-block radius. Extremely discouraging behavior. If the administration was able to have a few test cases and have successes in their under their belt, then I would come back to this Planning Commission and enthusiastically encourage you to please try and do everything that we can to help solve our housing crisis hand in hand with the administration. But I don't see it. I don't see it. And I do believe that the public process is important to this. And I think that asking for a bypass to that is unwarranted and unprudent. I know we're running late and I know you all have busy days, so I'll keep it at that. I appreciate everything that all my community members have brought forward to you tonight. I know this is a difficult task for you, but I don't believe the administration has done anything or demonstrated any reason for you to eliminate or streamline the public process and rule out any kind of community input in the way that they have. So please take that with you this evening. I appreciate your time and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Andy, we have two more members of the public. Not sure if they would like to speak. Mark Boucher and Vana, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. It looks like we're all set with speakers, Andy.
Great. So thank you for everybody who spoke to us tonight on this. We'll close the public hearing, but as I said at the beginning of this this item, we're going to take it up at our next meeting, given the late hour. So we will take all these comments, and Megan, there were some that, you know, I think it would be helpful to get responses to as well. I didn't really write them down, but you may have made note of some of the questions that were asked during it. So, you know, at our next meeting, we could start off with some of those responses, and then we as the commission could pick up from there and do our work on it then. Unless there's any other questions or comments, we'll close out this item for tonight, but again, pick it up at our next meeting. Okay, great. So we'll close this item out, move on to commissioner items. And we do have our next meeting on June 28th at 6:30. Are there any other commissioner items?
Andy, could I just make a quick note about the June 28th meeting?
Sure.
Bye, thank you. That meeting will be the first meeting that we will have both Charles and Sarah here in Burlington in person. So would like to extend the offer that if any of the commissioners are feeling comfortable joining us in person for that meeting, it could be a nice opportunity for you to get to meet them, get to know them a little bit versus just seeing them in their Zoom boxes. So we'll have an option for you to join us here in the Busher Conference Room, which is in the lower level of City Hall. And if you're planning to attend, just give us a shout and let us know that we can expect you. So.
Thank you.
And that will be, I think that will be Bryn's last meeting as well. So we could also send her off.
Okay, good. Thanks. Any other commissioner items? All right, we'll close that. Then we're on to minutes and communications. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting and accept the communications?
I would like to approve the minutes from our last meeting and accept the communications, or is it the other way around?
Oh, that was it. Great. Motion by Alex. Is there a second? Seconded by Michael. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Right. Any opposed? We have our minutes and communications. Final item is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I will move to adjourn.
By Bruce, seconded by Alex. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye or raise your hand. We stand adjourned. Thank you all. This was a long meeting, but thanks for, there's a lot of good stuff we got through today.
Thank you.
We'll send Bruce his
Thank
spirit
you all.
mail.
Take care.
Bye.